I didn't plan to get involved in anyone's life, especially not his. Everything started because I simply wanted to help. That was all. Nothing more. At least that's what I kept telling myself. My own home had turned into a place where conversations were short, touches were accidental, and love felt like a faded photograph hanging crooked on a wall. I didn't hate my life, but I had stopped feeling seen inside it. And when you go long enough without being seen, even a small moment of attention feels like sunlight after weeks of rain. He came into my life quietly, without any intention of changing anything. He needed guidance, nothing dramatic, just someone to listen, someone to steady him when he felt overwhelmed with everything unfolding around him. I offered help because it felt natural, almost automatic. I didn't think twice. He wasn't supposed to become important. But some people slip into your life softly and suddenly you're paying attention to the way their voice steadies when you reassure them, or how they pause before thanking you, as if holding on to the moment a little longer than necessary. The first time I noticed something shift was when he looked at me the way no one had in a long time, not with desire but with genuine gratitude, like he finally felt understood. That look stayed with me longer than it should have. I tried to brush it off, but it lingered in the back of my mind, replaying itself when I tried to sleep. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was just tired. I told myself a lot of things. His messages started coming more often, not in a demanding way but in a way that made it obvious he trusted me. He asked for advice. He asked how my day was. He asked things no one at home had bothered to ask in months. I kept replying because it felt harmless. Felt good to be valued. Maybe that was the real beginning of everything. Not a moment, but a slow return of warmth I didn't realize I'd been missing. One evening, he admitted he didn't know who else to talk to. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to pull away, to create distance before things wandered into territory neither of us could justify. Another part of me, the lonely, neglected, quietly aching part, felt drawn to that vulnerability in him. I told myself I was helping. That single excuse became the cover I hid behind. He started noticing things about me no one else did. The way my voice changed when I tried to stay strong, the pauses I made before answering difficult questions, the slight sigh I didn't realize I let out when I felt exhausted. He noticed, and that scared me more than anything. Because once someone sees you clearly, pretending becomes impossible. I kept telling myself I could control the situation. I could stay within boundaries. But connection doesn't ask for permission, just grows. And before I realized it, I stopped helping him out of kindness, and started helping him because being near him made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in far too long. After that conversation, nothing felt neutral anymore. Every message carried weight. Every pause felt intentional. I started noticing how carefully I chose my words, how often I reread them before sending, as if meaning could leak through the screen if I wasn't cautious. I told myself I was still in control because nothing physical had happened. But control is a fragile thing when desire has already been named. The guilt arrived quietly. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It showed up in small moments, when my partner talked about future plans, when they reached for me absent-mindedly, when they trusted me without question. I would nod, smile, respond like everything was fine, while part of my mind was somewhere else entirely. I tried to convince myself that honesty made this different, that wanting something didn't automatically make me a bad person. I wasn't sneaking around, I wasn't lying outright. I was just holding something back. My conversations with him grew more personal. Not flirtatious in an obvious way, but intimate in a way that mattered more. We talked about fears, about disappointments we never said out loud to anyone else. There was a sense of being understood without having to explain myself fully. That connection became addictive. I began to look forward to those moments, to the way he made me feel seen without demanding anything from me. And that scared me because I realized how easily emotional closeness can replace loyalty if you let it. When the idea came up again, it was clearer this time. He didn't push. He didn't try to persuade me. He simply asked if I had thought about it. I admitted that I had. More than I wanted to. We talked about boundaries, about consent, about what it would mean and what it wouldn't. He said watching wasn't about ownership, that it was about trust and honesty. I listened carefully, not because I needed convincing, but because his words matched the thoughts I had been trying to ignore. What unsettled me most was recognizing my own desire in this. I wasn't being led or manipulated. I was choosing to stay in the conversation. I was choosing not to walk away. There was something about being seen, about being acknowledged in such an open way, that made me feel alive again. At the same time, I knew that wanting this didn't erase the consequences. Consent didn't make it harmless. It just made it complicated as the possibility became more real. My hesitation changed shape. It wasn't about fear of being judged anymore. It was about knowing that once this happened, there would be no pretending it hadn't. I could already sense the shift inside me, the way I was mentally stepping away from the person I had been before. That realization didn't stop me. Instead, it made everything feel heavier, more deliberate. By the time we agreed on a moment, nothing felt accidental. There was no confusion about what we were doing or why. The decision was quiet, almost calm, and that was the most frightening part. I understood then that the point of no return isn't a dramatic act. Sometimes it's simply the moment you stop trying to talk yourself out of what you already want. The anticipation was heavier than I expected. It settled into my body long before anything actually happened, tightening my thoughts, sharpening my awareness. Every sound felt louder. Every pause stretched longer than it should have. I was acutely aware of myself, how I stood, how I breathed, how exposed I felt without anything tangible changing yet. Knowing I was being watched even before it truly began, created a tension I had never experienced before. It wasn't just about desire. It was about presence. About not being able to disappear into the moment the way I usually did. When it finally did happen, there was no rush, no suddenness. It unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if time itself had decided to move differently. I felt vulnerable in a way that went beyond the physical. My thoughts were loud, conflicting, impossible to silence. Part of me was hyper-aware of every small movement, while another part felt oddly detached, observing myself from the outside. The awareness of his gaze changed everything. It made each second feel intentional, as though nothing could be done casually or without meaning. What surprised me most was how complex the emotions were. There was excitement, yes, but it was tangled with nervousness and a deep, almost uncomfortable honesty. I couldn't hide behind assumptions or habits. Being seen like that stripped away any illusion I had about control. I realized how much of my life I spent managing how others perceived me, and how impossible that felt now. In that exposure, there was both fear and a strange sense of freedom. I thought I would feel powerful the entire time, but that wasn't true. The power shifted back and forth, sometimes within the same breath. There were moments when I felt completely in command of myself, and others when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of the choice I had made. Desire didn't silence my conscience. It existed alongside it, forcing me to feel everything at once instead of numbing anything out. When it ended, the change was immediate. The air felt different, heavier, as if it carried everything that had just happened but had nowhere to put it. I became aware of my heartbeat, of the quiet that followed. No one rushed to fill it. There was no celebration, no relief, just stillness. In that stillness, the reality of what we had crossed began to settle in. I expected regret to hit first, sharp and unforgiving. Instead, what came was clarity. A calm understanding that something irreversible had taken place, not because of the act itself, but because of what it revealed about me. I had learned something I couldn't unlearn. About my desires. About my boundaries. About how easily I could justify stepping outside of them, that we didn't say much afterward. Words felt unnecessary, almost inadequate. Everything that needed to be acknowledged was already hanging between us. Unspoken but unmistakable. I realized then that silence can carry more weight than any confession. As I sat with my thoughts, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever this had given me, it had also taken something away. And even though part of me had wanted this moment, I knew I would never experience it without also carrying the memory of how heavy it felt once it was real. After that, everything looked the same but nothing felt it. Daily routines continued without interruption. Conversations flowed as they always had. Yet there was a quiet distance I couldn't explain away. I noticed it in myself first. I was more careful with my words, slower to respond, more aware of what I didn't say. The memory followed me into ordinary moments, turning them heavier than they should have been. It wasn't guilt in the dramatic sense. It was awareness. Once you see yourself clearly, it's hard to look away. My partner didn't accuse me of anything. That almost made it worse. Their trust remained intact, unshaken. And it forced me to confront the difference between what I appeared to be and what I now knew about myself. I found myself studying small gestures, wondering if they sensed the shift or if I was imagining it all. The truth was, nothing external had changed. The consequence lived entirely inside me, and that made it impossible to escape. There were moments when I tried to justify what I had done. I told myself it had been honest, consensual, intentional. I hadn't acted out of impulse or carelessness. But justification didn't bring relief. It only highlighted the gap between explanation and accountability. Wanting something, even choosing it openly, doesn't remove the responsibility that comes after. I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I was an active participant, and that realization demanded more from me than regret ever could. Eventually, I had to face the hardest part: understanding why I wanted to be seen that way in the first place. Not admired, not desired, seen, acknowledged without filters. That need didn't come from nowhere, and pretending it did would only guarantee I'd repeat the same pattern. I began to see that the real betrayal wasn't just of a relationship, but of the version of myself I believed I was. The person who knew where the line was and stayed safely on the right side of it. I didn't confess everything. I also didn't pretend nothing had happened. Instead, I started changing the way I showed up. I became more present, more honest about my emotional distance, more willing to confront discomfort instead of escaping into it. That didn't erase what I'd done, but it gave the experience a purpose beyond secrecy. Growth doesn't undo harm, but it can prevent it from becoming a habit. Looking back now, I understand the title of this story differently. It wasn't really about him wanting to watch, or even about me wishing the same. It was about what happens when desire meets permission, and whether we're prepared to live with what that reveals. Some experiences don't destroy you, they expose you. And once exposed, you don't get to choose ignorance again. You only get to choose what you do with the truth you uncovered.